Okay, I'm back here with Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson to talk about what's been happening in with the national security strategy. So take a look for part one if you're interested in that. Now, retired U.S. Army Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson has been a frequent and insightful guest on this channel. He's had a phenomenal career, most famously, of course, as Colin Powell's Chief of Staff during Powell's tenure as Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Pentagon, and in the 2000s when Powell was Secretary of State. In a few seconds, I'm going to be joined by Larry to talk about there have been remarkable attacks, televised more or less, on speedboats, which have been blown up, 22, I think, and 87 people killed, and threats and insults towards Venezuela and talk about invasion. So I was thinking about it, and I actually read, I think, on your Wikipedia page, that when you were a pilot, a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, that you interposed your helicopter between some civilians and another helicopter that was planning to shoot them. I don't know if that's a true story, but if it is, I would think it would be galling to you as a military officer with honor to see these kind of strikes.
Yes, that is a true story. And I have to say that the rules of engagement at that time in the three corps area allowed me to do that with impunity because I was the commander of the two choppers, the one up high at 5,000 feet that was armed to the teeth, and me that was down on the top of the jungle looking for the enemy. And when I said, "You don't shoot," that chopper didn't shoot. And if it looked like he was defying me and I moved my bird in between him and the target, he had to stop or he was going to kill me. And that's a war crime par excellence, if you will, inside the military. In this case, I think it's necessary to look at the commander in chief again. And Heather Cox Richardson did so in an article that I read this morning. And in her opening paragraph, she points out the dimension of the commander in chief that I want to highlight. On the 3rd of December, as I recall, a reporter asked him in a news conference if he would allow the video of the strike in September, 2 September, I think it was, that we're talking about, that particular strike, to be revealed. Of course, yes, yes, yes. That was the answer. 6 or 7 days later, he's asked essentially the same question: where is it and when will we see it? I never said that. And he criticizes his reporter, turns and makes an aside to someone, says, "That's a stupid reporter." You know, that's our president. So you have to deal with that right from the start. But looking at it in terms of the law, especially the law of armed conflict and everything we developed since the Nuremberg Tribunal and the Geneva Conventions and all the things that we thought we were for or said we were for in terms of international criminal law and the law of land warfare and so forth. We started with my president, George W. Bush, in his definition of torture being just short of organ failure, in his then use of torture from the highest office in the land condoned to gain information in the so-called global war on terror, which is just the same sort of phenomenon as the war on narco-terrorism. We started this slippery path.
Right.
We've done these things in the past, of course, but never condoned at the highest level in the land by the President of the United States. Now we're just moving into another realm of it. We're calling it not the global war on terror, but the regional war, if you will, on narcotics or narco-terrorism. Just as much nonsense. First of all, because you can't make war on a methodology. And second of all, because, and this one is even more, George Bush had some motivation, 3,000 plus dead Americans and a lot of buildings burning and smoldering and such. He had some motivation. Trump has no motivation other than politics and his base and keeping his base happy. So he is actually doing the same thing George W. Bush did, but in terms of having a rationale for doing it that might make sense to you or me, he has none whatsoever. Because if you examine what's actually happening, and I've been looking at the drug war for 30 years, there is no way you are having any impact that will matter to the drug conflict, if you will, by what you're doing. And yet you're
Mm.
solving your political problem with your base by doing it. And at the same time, you're corrupting the military immensely by creating an environment where apparently we have an entire chain of command that is violating the law, both internal law, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, both domestic United States and United States domestic law and international law, and perpetrating war crimes. And the most
Yeah.
flagrant one so far has been the one where the two gentlemen, I think, were trying to get out of the boat or trying to escape the burning boat, and the order was given to kill them too. And now that controversy is over who gave the order, it matters not, except it's more egregious if the SecDef gave the order or SecWar gave the order. But Admiral Bradley's as guilty as he, and the people who carried it out are guilty.
Right.
The code in the military, the law in the military, the rule in the military, call it what you will, it's ironclad. The rule is that you follow your oath in obeying orders. And the oath for officers is slightly different than enlisted. The enlisted oath, which I took also because I was an enlisted man first, includes and the orders of the officers appointed over me. In other words, you don't just obey the Constitution and so forth. You also obey the orders of the officers appointed over you. But you go on and read the oath fully, and you understand the milieu in which that was all developed. You understand that that means you don't follow illegal orders either. And the military spends a long time and a arduous effort in classrooms and in platoon meetings and so forth, instilling the idea in both enlisted and officer that you do not violate the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And and we give examples galore of what are illegal orders. We even use things like the My Lai massacre in Vietnam and other examples like that to make sure that the enlisted troops and the officers, especially the junior ones, know what we mean when we say what a war crime is. So there's no excuse for these people. For Bradley, I think we've seen the only courage in this entire chain of command. We've seen courage from the admiral in charge of Southern Command, Admiral Housley. He said he's leaving, and he's leaving in December, I think, now.
And he resigned because or he was pushed, or he said he won't do it, and then he was pushed out. But I don't know how many people know that the Code of Military Justice in the United States goes back to the time of Lincoln, when he hired a lawyer, Franz Lieber. But that actually preceded Geneva law. So the United States has a long history of supposedly obeying the law.
The first commander-in-chief, George Washington, made it very clear to his officers. He even had Alexander Hamilton, his adjutant, write out an order to this effect, several orders, that they were not going to be like the British. The British would castrate you. They would torture you. Washington said, this is a new country and a new army. I wish I could quote it verbatim. I used to be able to, but my memory's terrible these days. We will not do these things. And if I catch you doing any of these things, you will be punished.
One could argue that it's more honored in the breach by all leaders who've said these things. Nevertheless, there they are, and the standard is. There's a quote of Hegseth that I just want to read you, that United States soldiers should not fight by rules written by dignified men in mahogany rooms 80 years ago.
No, they should follow the rules of a person or the orders of a person who is not even at lieutenant level and running the largest not-for-profit organization on the face of the earth.
Well, Tommy, you must have not-for-profit? I'm not so sure about that. But anyway,
not for their profit, supposedly.
Not supposedly. But you have connections inside the military still, of course. And the whole world watched those stone-faced admirals and generals when Hegseth was telling them they shouldn't be fat and so forth. There must be, I would imagine, inside the United States military, a great deal of concern. I hope so,
I certainly hope
about
so
what's
too.
happening. So what's your insider read on that? What's behind the scenes there?
I hope you're right too. It's one of my fondest and greatest hopes these days to see my military so ruined the way it is that someone will, or many someones will stand up. That meeting at Quantico did not give me a lot of hope. It did not give me a lot of hope. And I also have subsequently learned how many people Hegseth has gotten rid of to include the senior legal officers in each of the services,
Mm.
people like that throughout the structure. And I also know,
These are the judge advocates general, the
yeah,
lawyers who
yeah,
try to make
the
sure.
chief ones who dictate to the others below what will be and what will not be of concern to them, as much as does the Uniform Code of Military Justice. These guys set the pace, and he's gotten rid of them. And I've found out subsequently too that he's gotten rid of a lot of people who have registered already their objections to some of the things he's doing. And he's gotten rid of them either internally in the service, that is, demoted them and put them somewhere else, or he's actually gotten rid of them entirely. And this includes civilians as well as military. So this is a move, and coupled with the new recruiting that he's doing, and the new recruiting is in places where you find Christian nationalists, for example, you find people that are MAGA types, and you only recruit them. So he's actually changing the officer corps at the same time he's changing the rank and file. And I think the whole purpose of doing this is not only so they'll correspond more fully with Hegseth's wishes, they will be ready for a coup. And this time it won't fail.
That's yeah, that's a terrifying possibility. Um, I wonder, like the six lawmakers who were previously serving in the military or the intelligence services uh, put out that video saying you are not obliged to follow unlawful orders. Now they've been. It looks like Mark Kelly is maybe going to be called back into service and court-martialed. I don't know if that'll happen. How do
That's
you see
that's a battle
that
between legislative and executive branch.
that playing out?
I don't think the Congress realizes how much power it really has. And I say that based on two grounds. One, because Thune in the Senate and Johnson in the House are both Trumpifites par excellence, and they have a pretty good grip on at least a majority of both of their houses. And that makes Congress more quiescent than it would be otherwise. But again, I go back to the Constitution, this document right here. Article 1 and Article 2 are very different in terms of war powers, as it were. The Congress has far more power over the armed forces than the executive branch does. The executive branch under Trump has just defied that and usurped a lot of power for the executive branch, still doing it, going to do even more because the Supreme Court's going to probably fine for it in this tariff battle. And then Trump's going to be the executor of tariffs across the country and the world, which is not what the founders wanted and not what the Constitution says. But until the Congress wakes up and realizes it has this power and is willing to try and enforce that power, however it may do that, presidents have said since time immemorial, I guess, that where's your army? Where's the army? Where's the police force that Congress has? I have all the police forces. I have all the armies and navies and everything else. But there is a power, as Justice Jackson said many years ago, there is a power or a lack of power in consistently defying the Congress from the executive branch. And he went on in that decision to say the power of the president is enhanced immeasurably when what he does is in consonance with the wish of the Congress rather than in defiance thereof. This Congress, in other words, despite its MAGA nature at the start, will wake up.
Mm.
I hope it wakes up soon enough. I think
Now
it's
this is,
getting to even right now.
I'm sorry. Yeah, this is the same Justice Jackson who was the prosecutor at Nuremberg.
Yes, it is. He was talking about Truman acting against the Congress's wishes. I think it was the steel strikes.
Oh,
And
right. Yes, I remember.
yeah, in his opinion, he said, okay, fine, but let me tell you something, Mr. President. Let me give you a piece of advice. When you act in consonance with the legislature, you're very powerful. When you defy it, you weaken yourself.
Well, is there something that probably not going to happen given the sort of nature of the Democratic Party, but would it not make sense for it to be said that those who violate the Universal Code of Military Justice or Geneva law will be pursued and punished when power does return to Congress or a new president? In other words, saying you may think you'll get away with it now because you have Pete, Secretary of War, at the helm, but that doesn't last forever, and you may be prosecuted going forward.
You would hope that, but look at the record. We have not held anyone significantly accountable for about 35 years, and that includes the military. We had failure after failure in Afghanistan, for example. What general was fired? What general was reprimanded, other than McChrystal when he really made President Obama angry? The only one out of about 11. When have we held anybody accountable for any crime in this country of a seminal nature? We haven't. So I'm really reluctant to express the view that, well, watch out for the future because a subsequent administration might do something to punish you. Look at Obama. He said, I'd rather go forward than look back.
And beginning with President Ford and the pardoning of Nixon, oh, I'm sure going farther back than that. But yeah, there has been very little of that. And of course, Obama increased the war. Well, he I think did 500 drone strikes himself.
He made it more out of sight.
But it's worth remembering that the current secretary, do I have to call him the Secretary of War? I mean, I now see their website does say Department of War.
Yeah, I call him Old Petey.
Well, he's not that old yet, unfortunately. But Hegseth,
OLE, meaning Old Petey, get out of here.
Yeah, all right. Well, he came to prominence, of course, in the media by defending the right and the need for U.S. soldiers to commit war crimes. In fact, there were 2 or 3 convicted people who were convicted of war crimes in, I think, Afghanistan, and he persuaded the president to pardon them. It comes from that. It's very much his raison d'etre as Secretary of Defense.
That is true. And it comes from Trump's very character, I guess. He just pardoned, while he's declaring this war on narco terrorists, he just pardoned one of the biggest narco dealers in Latin America, the former president of Honduras, who had been duly convicted in a U.S. court. And he just pardoned him.
But it was just 400 tons of cocaine. It wasn't like, a major...
Matched Venezuela's oil reserves.
Right. Yeah, that's right. It's interesting about these strikes you mentioned earlier, the September 2nd strike, which got tremendous amount of attention from the media. And I sometimes feel that by focusing on killing 2 shipwrecked sailors, it makes it seem like that's the problem, whereas you sort of tacitly endorse everything before that, like actually striking the boat. But it's also interesting that the shipwrecked sailors aspect, which I think I looked it up, is specifically mentioned in the U.S. Navy laws of war. But it was also what Admiral Dönitz was convicted for at Nuremberg, was a very similar kind of crime, like not giving an order not to pick up people at sea, which is actually not as bad as murdering them. But yeah, but the power of the Secretary of Defense here and the power of Marco Rubio, you were in the Secretary of State's office. How much influence can a man like that have? You've got here a president who is easily distracted, doesn't concentrate, sometimes even doesn't manage to stay awake. Can, like a guy like Marco Rubio, who does want to transform Latin America, we think, perhaps does want to overthrow the regime in the government in Cuba or Venezuela, is it possible that he can really sway U.S. policy?
Well, now you're talking my academic subject. I taught for 16 years on one campus, 6 years on another campus, and almost 10 years in the military, this very subject. And what it boils down to is the chemistry and character of the decision-making team under the 1947 National Security Act. this is a unique team in many respects, and in other respects, it's very much like previous 1947 on teams. The chemistry of this administration is that Donald Trump fears Rubio for the very reason Tucker Carlson told him to fear him. Apparently, at least Tucker's admitted to it. He told him, don't pick Rubio to be your vice president because then they'll assassinate you. In other words, there are a lot of people out there that'd rather have Marco Rubio, the neoconservative par excellence, and that includes Lindsey Graham in the Senate, as the president than J.D. Vance. So this is a team where much the same way Bush looked at Powell as a potential 2004 candidate and therefore negating, because he would have been elected, negating George W. Bush's chance of beating his daddy and getting 2 terms. Trump looks at Rubio, I think, in that way too. It's arm's distance. Part of the reason I think he pulled him in and made him national security advisor in addition to being Secretary of State is because he wanted a better check on him and he wanted a better observation post, if you will, for him.
He'd rather have his enemies inside the tent
right.
Pissing out. Yeah.
And Hegseth, I think, is best described as a total sycophant. Hegseth does not really know what he's doing, and he's not very well served by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs because his history is Air Force and special operations in the Pacific, and he doesn't know what he's doing in the broader scope of things either. So they're taking their guidance from Trump, however convoluted that guidance may be. That's the reason Hegseth gets caught up short so many times and looking like a wounded animal when he's beside Trump because Trump suddenly says something that Hegseth contradicted 5 minutes before that. And he's scrambling, trying to get back on Trump's side. So you've got a sycophant and a do anything you tell me to do in the Defense Department. You got an opponent at the State Department and an ultra neoconservative. And then throughout the rest of the cabinet, you have a CIA director who is Bibi Netanyahu's CIA director. You have a Homeland Security Secretary who doesn't know what she's doing from one moment to the next. You got an attorney general who is illegal in the very office she's operating from. You've got all manner of these weird characters. And then at the top, of course, you've got the weirdest one of all. You got Donald Trump. So studying the chemistry, especially the decision-making chemistry of this administration, is almost an impossible task because it's so mercurial, so unpredictable, and so dominated at key points by Donald Trump and his very mercurial nature. Putin calls it unpredictability in private circles. I think it's more pronounced than unpredictability. I think the man is senile. I think he's really senile and he's getting worse every day. So how do you operate? How do you even assess the chemistry of such a group of people in terms of national security decision making? Very difficult.
And yet the national security strategy does have a coherent. It is recognize a sphere of influence of Russia and Europe. It says back off the Middle East. It says focus on this hemisphere. By the way, as a Canadian, it's a little distressing to see the belligerence, if you like, with which it declares it's going to maintain sea lanes, given our relationship to the Arctic. But given all that, focusing on the hemisphere, and as you say, possibly as a pause before actually confronting China, that seems like a coherent policy, though.
Let me shock you, if I may, with a comment from the Bush administration, the George W. Bush administration. When Richard Haas got the responsibility from Condi Rice, then the National Security Advisor, Richard Policy Planning Head at the State Department under Powell, to write the national security strategy from George W. Bush, we labored on it for about 8 months. Then Condi took it away, tried to write it on the National Security Council staff. Then she contracted it out. I would bet you this was contracted out to Heritage or somebody else like that.
So it's kind of, it's their policy.
Yep. Well,
that's what you look.
Project 25 is the Trump administration's policy writ large.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. Well, just to final up, there was another quote that I saw: "In this battle, mercy or considerations of international law with regard to these elements is false. They are a danger to our own safety. It struck me as similar to the language we're hearing from Hegseth. It's actually from Hitler's order to the Wehrmacht for the invasion of the Soviet Union.
There's an even worse one than that he gave the Schutzstaffel leading the attack into Poland. It was, don't worry about territory, buildings, or anything else. Just kill people.
Yeah. So those are ugly precedents. Let's hope it doesn't continue on that path.
We look today, I'm sorry to say, sad to say, a lot like Nazi Germany.
Larry, it's a horrible place to leave it. Do you want to say anything else before we go?
Please, Americans, wake up.
Larry Wilkerson, I want to thank you for an excellent interview, and I really look forward to our talking again.
Take care. Thank you.
So long.
Bye-bye.
And thanks to you for watching. On the Analysis website, you'll find a donate button. And please don't forget to subscribe if you like this. See you next time.